Well, good afternoon. Appreciate Pat giving me the opportunity to be here. Steve had made a comment about the photo shoot. I felt like I was there with Pat forever. We just kept taking photo after photo after photo. I said, Pat, I'll tell you the same thing I told my wife. I don't get any better looking. This is what we got. So, well, as Pat said, I am Kent Gustafson, and I am the founder and president of Safe Shield. We have expertise in the areas of corporate compliance, corporate formalities, as well as entity formation. We have been utilizing this expertise to provide services to small and medium-sized businesses for the past 6 years. So today we're going to take some time to take a look at what corporate record compliance is. We will talk about the requirements, the risks, and then some common misconceptions that business owners have today. Some of the key terms and definitions that we're going to cover during the next 20 minutes or so, corporate compliance and corporate formalities, I've already mentioned those, and we'll dig into those a little bit deeper as we go. We're also going to talk about the corporate veil. I have a client, and she's heard me speak on a number of occasions. She says, I always love it when you use corporate veil. It just sounds so cool. I don't know if it's cool or not, but we are going to dig into it and learn a little bit more about what it is and what it might mean to you as a business owner. So how many people here, just quick show of hands, are familiar with the term corporate veil? A few of you have heard it before. Okay, those of you that raised your hands, do you know what it means? Anyone? I'm not going to pick on Steven because he's already been called on enough times. So, I decided that rather than give you some boring definition of what the corporate veil is and what it means to pierce the corporate veil, we would look at a nice illustration of it. And I had my marketing team working on this. They actually have spent years perfecting this illustration. Any questions? I used to tell people that I work with a great marketing team. I don't anymore. So now I will give you a little bit of a boring definition of what piercing the corporate veil means. And basically, piercing the corporate veil means that a court disregards the existence of the corporation or the LLC because the owners of the company have failed to properly observe one or more corporate formalities. So now that we know what it means to be compliant and keep our corporate veil intact, it should be pretty easy to do, right? Piece of cake. So let's take a look at what we are required to do. I'm assuming everybody can see that okay in the back? Well, the point of this slide is to let you know there's a lot to know. There's a lot to understand. I don't know if it's reasonable for a business owner to remember all of these requirements or understand them and be able to follow through on all of these things. And that's really up to the business owner to decide if they want to invest the time and the effort into understanding these requirements, and then they can hope and pray that they actually follow through on all of them. My recommendation would be to work with somebody that does understand these, perhaps a professional that has expertise in these areas. I do want to cover briefly just an overview of what corporate record compliance and formalities actually mean. Corporate record compliance, corporations and LLCs are governed by state-specific laws, and all of these entities are subject to the strict operating guidelines that exist within their state of formation. In addition, they must keep records and documentation, both for federal and state compliance purposes, as well as tax filings and tax records. Corporate formalities, this basically refers to the actions that a business owner would perform to demonstrate that they're functioning like a formal business entity and documenting the activities of their business. So, how many people here know what a corporate record book is? A few of you, okay. How many people have one or know where it is? Okay, that's good. I can't tell you how many times we will sit down and talk with business owners and we'll ask them about their corporate record book, and they'll tell us something along the lines of, man, I haven't thought about that thing for years. I don't even know where it is. Okay. If that's the case, we're relatively confident that they have not been maintaining it properly and updating it regularly. So again, we ask people, do you have one? If you have one, do you know where it is? And then if you do know where it is it complete? Is it updated regularly? How many people here have an entity of some form that they own? Corporation, LLC? Okay. How many of you are confident that it was properly formed? Okay. We'll get back to that. I'll come back to that a little bit later. Yeah, I know a few of you. Yeah. We talked about the corporate record book, what it is, where is it, does it get updated regularly? If you were a person that has a business entity and you answered no to any of those questions, you have some significant risk to your business that you need to assess and address. It's a very common misconception that the corporate veil is impenetrable. I've set up my corporation, I've set up my LLC, I'm covered, I don't have anything to worry about. This is absolutely not true. The Cornell Law Review was actually the first to do research in this area, and they found that corporate veils were pierced 95% of the time when courts had determined that shareholders disregarded the separateness of the corporation or LLC. Well, a primary reason that this happens, I've reviewed hundreds upon hundreds of record books, and the reason that this happens is because 99% of them are incomplete. We often hear people say that, you know what, I don't really worry about my corporate record book. My attorney, my CPA takes care of that. It's at their office. Most of these business owners don't realize that according to Minnesota statute, their corporate record book must reside in their principal office of business. And I dare say that's not their CPA's office or their attorney's office. But I thought I was protected. We hear this from business owners quite frequently. Earlier I asked how many of you were confident that you had a properly formed entity. And I've mentioned that I've reviewed hundreds and hundreds of records, including formation records. And many, many times a business owner will turn over to us articles of organization and a federal tax ID number. And that is the extent of their formation documents. This is a completely inadequate, incomplete formation. And the corporate veil or protection that this business owner thinks that they have is a complete sham. A number of years ago, we had a business owner that came to us, and she was in a significant amount of trouble. She had found out that her bookkeeper had been embezzling money from the company, over $100,000 in fact, and she found out about it because she was receiving judgments from vendors that were owed money. She was perplexed by this because she knew that there'd been sufficient cash flow to pay the bills, only to find out that that money had instead gone to remodeling the bookkeeper's house, going on vacations, buying cars, those kinds of things. As soon as it turned legal, they went after the assets of the corporation, which were minimal. And at that point, they looked at the foundation of the corporation. This particular business owner had gone the do-it-yourself approach and had an insufficient foundation to her corporation. In addition to that, she had done no ongoing maintenance, no ongoing reviews and documentation. They pierced her corporation. She was forced to liquidate personal assets to satisfy the judgments against her. And when all was said and done, she did not have sufficient money or resources to continue on, and she's out of business today. What about business insurance? And before I go any further, I'm going to tell you that we are huge proponents of business insurance. We recommend it to all of our clients, without question. However, traditional insurance policies will not cover you if your corporate veil is pierced. Many people don't know that. They think that their business liability protection or their personal umbrella is in place. They don't have anything to worry about. We came in contact with a business owner, a husband and wife who owned a fitness club. They had an LLC that owned the building, and then they had an S corporation that operated the business, two separate entities, both owned by the husband and wife. They had a customer that slipped and fell coming into the building, and that person was injured and filed a suit against the businesses, both the LLC and the corporation, named the owners personally, and When they dug into the records of the entities, they found that the LLC had been improperly or inadequately formed, and they did not have proper documentation. They did not have any type of review documents. They did not have a proper lease agreement between the two companies. At this point, their insurance was not liable to protect them in this situation, and the husband and wife owners actually ended up spending about $50,000 out of their pocket to satisfy the claim. I mentioned earlier, sometimes people say, well, my attorney or my CPA has this at their office and they take care of all this stuff for me. When we hear people say, my attorney or my CPA is taking care of this for me, we say, great, let's take a look at what they've done. You know, we'll provide a free assessment. Let's see what they've done for you. We have a client that we've worked with for several years now, and he came to us actually under that premise. He said, you know, my attorney's been taking care of this for me in the past, but we'd really like to have you guys do this work for us going forward. So we requested all the information that his attorney had done for him, and what we found out is that he had been billed a substantial amount of money on an annual basis by his attorney, and yet no documentation had ever been done. And this happened over the course of several years. So whenever we hear that, you know, my attorney, my CPA, or some other advisor is taking care of this for me, we always challenge business owners, great, let's pull what you've got and let's take a look at it and see if that's really the case. Because oftentimes, what you think they're doing for you, they're not doing for you. If you're not meeting with them on a regular basis, if you're not going through various business activities and review items, if you're not signing review documents, most importantly, if you're not paying them on a regular basis for this work that you think they're doing, then they're not doing it. And then another common misconception that we run into is that, you know, I'm a small business. This kind of stuff doesn't happen to me. I think Steve mentioned that in his presentation as well. We're a small business, you know, this happens to big companies. This is absolutely not true. The reverse is actually true. There's never been a documented case of a publicly traded company in the United States having their corporate veil pierced. In most cases, when the corporate veil is pierced, it's small businesses with 10 shareholders or less. And I know personally, over the past 6 years, I've come in contact with many business owners who have felt the ramifications of having their corporate veil pierced. In each of those cases, it resulted in significant financial loss for the business owner, and it was in every single case companies that had 1 or 2 owners, no more than that. So common mistakes can equal great risk. We talk to businesses about this all the time. Failure to file, for an example, I mean, this is something we've seen happen to business owners many times. It can be a simple filing that is required with the state that keeps your business active, your name in good standing, and if it's not made, you are not an active business in good standing according to the state of Minnesota, according to banks or other people that you might be working with. In addition to that, anyone could come along and file for a new entity under your name because it's not your name anymore. We've had businesses come to us that have been in this situation where they found people have taken their name. In some cases, they've had the offer from that business to sell it back to them for $25,000, which is a great deal, I'm sure. In other cases, we've had people forced to go through a reactive rebranding process, changing their letterhead, their website, all of their marketing materials, contacting all of their clients to let them know we've changed our name. They had to come up with a good excuse as to why they had changed their name, and they couldn't really tell the truth because they didn't want to admit that they had made a mistake. Change to signage. I mean, we've seen people spend $10,000 to $15,000 all because they failed to make a filing. Neglecting reviews. This is such a clear violation of corporate formalities and not adhering to them. When you don't do reviews, when you don't document your business activities, you are not meeting corporate formalities. Insufficient documentation, we've seen this repeatedly as well. We've worked with a number of businesses that have come to us. Oftentimes it's through banks that we work with and have relationships with because they're trying to qualify for a loan. And in most cases, the business is financially solvent and has the footings to be issued the loan, but they don't have sufficient documentation that gives them the authorization to act on behalf of their company. People think that this is ridiculous, but I can assure you we've seen this happen time and time again. Now, in these situations, it's an issue that can be resolved, and we've resolved this for many businesses, but it slows down the process, slows down their access to the cash, and sometimes that has a ripple effect throughout their business, but it also does come with some added expense and some added headaches that could have been avoided had they done things the right way in the first place. Commingling of funds. This is a huge issue in business today. Many people don't understand this. We've talked with business owners that maybe they own 3 or 4 companies and they're the sole owner. They pay expenses for one company out of the checkbook from another. Stephen would never do anything like that, but other people do. They don't think that that's a big deal. They pay personal expenses out of the business account. They don't think that's a big deal. That is a clear textbook definition of commingling of funds, and as soon as they do that, they are creating a very easily documented paper trail that contradicts the separation that they've tried to establish with separate companies. Many people don't realize this. I'm aware of a business owner who he and his father started a company several years ago, and they filed articles with the state, they got a tax ID number. Pretty much everything else was agreed to verbally. They might have had a napkin that had a few notes scribbled on it. The intent was that it was 50-50, but ultimately the father had refinanced his home and taken out a second mortgage, and then also his lake place had taken out a second mortgage on that so that he could infuse about $200,000 of capital into the business so that they could buy inventory. This was never documented with a promissory note or any other type of document that would demonstrate it as a loan to the business. Fast forward a couple years later, the son and his wife are going through a divorce. It was clearly a marital asset because the company was started while they were married, and in their accounting records it looked like the company was potentially worth a couple $100,000. Never mind the fact that in order to come up with that cash, they would have to liquidate the inventory, and in theory there's a $200,000 note sitting out there to the father. Well, guess what? That note didn't get paid. The ex-spouse ended up with a majority of that cash. They liquidated their inventory and really have no way of going forward. And to make matters worse, the son had paid a lot of expenses that were considered personal expenses out of the business account. Fuel for the vehicle, groceries, going out to eat with the family, all those things were put on the business credit card. When the court was sorting out the assets and determining child support and alimony and all those things, they looked at the son and said, your income is actually quite a bit higher than what you've reported to us because all of this stuff right here is income to you. When all was said and done, he was looking at monthly payments to his wife that were actually greater than the cash he was taking out of the business each month. All of that could have been avoided had their foundation been properly documented, had the cash infusions been documented properly, and had they separated the commingling part. Operating outside of contracts, we see this a lot. People work out of verbal contracts. That's great when things are good. When things aren't so good, my perception of the verbal contract versus your perception of the verbal contract are usually two different things, far apart from each other. We always encourage people, document the agreements that you have in place, whether it be with partners or vendors, and make sure that you adhere to those guidelines. Mismanagement of employees, Mike talked about this a little bit earlier as well. I mean, this is a huge, huge problem. As long as employees are happy, your policies and procedures are no big deal, but as soon as they're not happy, they can create a big headache for you if you're not properly prepared. All of these things can potentially blur the lines between the business and the personal, and it should be avoided. Some best practices that we want to leave you with before we finish up here. We always recommend to people adopt a compliance plan. I think Mike talked about that as well, adopting an HR plan. I think Steve mentioned it as well. Consult with an advisor and review or assess your record book and your record keeping practices. Don't just assess your record book. Yes, that should be done, but what are your record keeping practices? That should be assessed as well, and then adopt a plan to move forward. Make sure that regular reviews are scheduled. Make sure that those reviews are conducted and documented properly. Review your bylaws or your operating agreement. I can't tell you how many times we've talked with business owners and they tell us, yeah, you know, we do this, we do that. We could take a quick look at their bylaws or operating agreement and find conflicts with how they're operating and what their incorporation documents tell them that they can or can't do. You know, submit to an outside assessment on a periodic basis. I really believe that this can be a beneficial thing for a business to have somebody come in that can offer an outside subjective perspective for that business owner. And then most importantly, I tell people, manage the compliance process so that it doesn't manage you. So many times we have business owners come to us with really serious problems. And at this stage of the game, because they failed to manage the process as they've gone along, they really don't have a lot of options, and the problems that they're facing don't really have good solutions. It's typically too late at that point. Just in closing, you know, I would encourage you to ask yourself these questions, and I won't go through all of them on the screen. You can look there and see them for yourself. But you know, we talked about, was the entity formed properly? Do you understand the requirements, and are you confident that you're following them? You know, do you have best practices implemented in your business? Do you follow them? Do you review and document your activities? I would say that unless you can answer yes to all these questions with 100% certainty, you would be well advised to consult with an advisor that does understand these areas of compliance and the requirements and can provide some solutions for you. It's really going to be in your best interest. And that's all I have. I want to thank Pat again for letting us come here today. It's a lot of fun, and you've been a great audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.